They moved my fence 6 feet onto my own land, and they did it while I was out of town, like it was nothing, like I wouldn't notice, like I didn't belong there anymore. So I took something from them too. Not a strip of dirt, not a few feet of gravel. I took their entire neighborhood's front door and erased it like it never existed. It started on a Monday, one of those slow, dragging Mondays where the air feels heavier than it should, and all you want is to get home, crack open a beer, and forget the world for a while. I remember turning off County Road 18, easing my truck onto my driveway, same as I'd done 1,000 times before, but something fell off before I even put it in park. You ever get that feeling, like your brain notices something before you can put words to it, like a picture that's been slightly tilted on the wall, not wrong enough to scream at you, but wrong enough to itch at the back of your skull? That's exactly what it felt like. I sat there for a second, engine idling, staring out across my front yard, trying to figure out what didn't line up. The fence, it looked crooked. Not broken, not damaged, just wrong. My mailbox was closer to the driveway than I remembered, and the gravel strip along the edge looked narrower, like someone had shaved it down overnight. I got out slowly, closed the truck door without slamming it, and started walking along the fence line, boots crunching on gravel, eyes scanning every inch like I was trying to catch something in the act, and then I saw it. Brand new posts. Fresh wood, still pale and clean, with that sharp, almost sweet smell of cut lumber. Concrete still slightly darker around the base like it hadn't fully cured yet. The boards were straight, evenly spaced, perfect, too perfect. And my fence, the one I'd repaired with my dad years ago, the one that had knots and uneven nails and history baked into every plank, it was gone. Not destroyed, not scattered, just removed. Stacked neatly about 10 feet in on my side of the property, like someone had politely set aside something they planned to throw away later. That's when my stomach dropped. Because this wasn't vandalism, this wasn't kids messing around, this was organized, planned, confident. I kept walking until I spotted a small plastic sign zip-tied to one of the new posts, cheap and flimsy, the kind you'd expect at a construction site. I pulled it closer and read it twice just to make sure my brain wasn't filling in the blanks wrong. Property line adjusted per community development plan. I actually laughed, not because it was funny, but because it was so absurd it didn't feel real. Community development plan? I didn't live in a community. I owned 3 acres on a corner lot that had been in my family for over 30 years. My nearest neighbor used to be half a mile away, until about a year ago. That's when they built Briar Hollow Estates. You've probably seen places like it. Big stone entrance, fake waterfall running over polished rocks, carefully planted trees that all look like they were picked out of a catalog, and a name that sounds like it belongs in a wine commercial. Briar Hollow. Even though there wasn't a single briar bush left after they bulldozed the land flat. Their houses were packed in tight. Identical driveways, identical mailboxes, identical little slices of yard pretending to be something bigger. And then there was my place. Open land, a workshop out back, an old tractor that still ran better than most new ones, and enough space to breathe without hearing someone else's TV through the wall. We coexisted fine, or at least I thought we did. Until I walked that fence line and realized someone over there had decided my land was part of their aesthetic. I didn't storm over right away. I wish I could say I did, that I kicked down a door and demanded answers, but the truth is, I stood there for a long time, just staring at those new posts, running the math in my head. 6 feet. It didn't sound like much, but stretched across the length of my property, that added up fast. That was land I paid taxes on. Land my father had cleared himself, one stubborn root at a time, back when this whole area was nothing but brush and clay. And somebody had just taken it, like it was a suggestion, not a boundary. I pulled out my phone, snapped a few pictures, then walked over to where they'd stacked my old fence. I ran my hand along one of the boards, felt the rough grain under my fingers, the tiny splits in the wood where weather and time had done their work, and I could almost hear my dad's voice in the back of my head, telling me to keep things straight, to never let anyone push you off what's yours. Not because it's about the land, but because it's about what it stands for. Respect. And right then, it was pretty clear that respect had gone missing. So I got back in my truck, turned it around, and drove straight toward Briar Hollow Estates. Not fast, not angry, just steady. Because something told me this wasn't going to be a shouting match. This was going to be something else. When I pulled up to their entrance, that big stone sign caught the sunlight just right, water trickling down the artificial waterfall like it was trying too hard to impress someone. And for the first time, I didn't see it as decoration. I saw it as leverage. And I had a feeling they hadn't thought that part through. I parked near the HOA office, a neat little building tucked beside the entrance, and walked up to the door. Inside, everything smelled like fresh paint and air freshener, like they were trying to bottle perfection and sell it by the square foot. A woman at the front desk looked up, smiled politely, and asked if she could help me. I just nodded and said, "Yeah, I need to talk to whoever decided they could move my fence." She hesitated for half a second, just enough to tell me she knew exactly what I was talking about. And that's when I realized this wasn't a mistake. They meant to do it. She didn't argue, didn't ask me to clarify, just gave that tight little smile people use when they're already bracing for trouble, then picked up the phone and said something soft I couldn't quite hear. A few seconds later, she nodded toward a glass office down the hall and said, "Mr. Calloway can see you now." Of course he could. I walked in, and there he was, mid-50s maybe, pressed button-down shirt, sleeves rolled just enough to look approachable, the kind of guy who probably practiced his handshake in the mirror. He stood up like we were old friends, stepped around the desk, and reached out his hand. "Ethan, right? I'm Mark Calloway, HOA president. I was hoping we'd get a chance to talk." I looked at his hand for a second, then shook it, firm but not friendly. "Yeah, funny how that works." He gestured for me to sit, still smiling like this was a casual neighborly chat, and not the beginning of a problem he'd already created. "I assume this is about the fence adjustment." "Adjustment? That word sat wrong. You mean the part where you moved it 6 feet onto my land while I was gone?" I said, keeping my voice level. He leaned back slightly, laced his fingers together like he was about to explain something simple to a child. "We conducted a new survey last week. Turns out the previous boundary markers were inaccurate. We corrected the line to reflect the updated development plan. It's all standard procedure." "Standard?" I let out a short breath, not quite a laugh. "You tore out my fence. We replaced it," he corrected smoothly, like that made it better. "With higher quality materials, I might add. No cost to you." I just stared at him for a second, trying to decide if he really believed what he was saying or if he'd said it so many times it had become truth in his head. "You didn't call me," I said. "Didn't knock. Didn't leave a message. You just decided." He shrugged slightly. "You were out of town. We were on a tight construction timeline. And honestly," he smiled again, softer this time, like he was doing me a favor, "we assumed you wouldn't mind. It improves the visual flow of the entrance." That was the moment something clicked. Not anger. Not yet, something colder than that. Because it wasn't about a mistake or a misunderstanding. It was about priority. Their entrance mattered more than my boundary. Their image mattered more than my ownership. And in his mind, that made sense. I leaned forward a little, resting my elbows on my knees. "Let me ask you something, Mark. If I decided your front yard looked better without your driveway, and I just tore it up while you were gone, you think you'd be okay with that?" His smile thinned just a bit. "That's not really the same thing." "No," I said quietly. "It's exactly the same thing. You just don't like being on this side of it." There was a pause, not long, but enough to break the rhythm he'd been controlling. He cleared his throat, shifted in his chair. "Well, regardless, the survey is legally binding. If you have concerns, you're welcome to review the documentation." "Oh, I will," I said, standing up. "I definitely will." And I left before he could wrap it up in another neat little explanation. Walking back out past that stone entrance, the waterfall, the lights, the big carved letters spelling out Briar Hollow Estates, I slowed down for a second, really looked at it. The way the stonework curved just slightly onto my side of the line, the way the landscaping extended past where it probably should have stopped. And that memory hit me clear as day. I was maybe 20 at the time, standing out there with my dad and the original developer, a guy named Russell Pike. Nice enough back then, smooth talker, big plans, kept saying words like vision and community. He'd asked if they could build the entrance slightly onto our land. Just temporarily, he'd said, until we finalize everything. My dad had looked at him for a long second, then said, "Long as it stays respectful. No paperwork. No easement. Just a handshake." Back then, that meant something. Now, apparently, it didn't mean a damn thing. I got back in my truck and sat there for a minute, engine off this time, just thinking. Because here's the thing. I could have gone the obvious route. Lawyer up, file a complaint, drag it through court for months, maybe years, spend money, burn time, and hope a judge eventually agreed with what I already knew was right. But standing there, looking at that entrance, I realized something. I didn't need to ask anyone for permission to fix this. I just needed to remind them what ownership actually meant. So instead of going home, I turned the key, pulled out onto the road, and headed straight for the county records office. Now, if you've never been inside one of those places, it's not exactly thrilling. Fluorescent lights, rows of filing cabinets, that quiet hum of printers and old computers. But to me, that day, it felt like walking into an armory. Because this was where the truth lived, not opinions, not HOA policies, not whatever visual flow meant. Just lines on paper that said what belonged to who. I walked up to the counter, told the clerk I needed the original plat maps for my parcel and anything related to Briar Hollow's development. She gave me a look like she'd seen this kind of situation before, not surprised, just tired on my behalf. "Give me a few minutes," she said. I spent the next hour flipping through documents, tracing boundary lines with my finger, cross-checking dates, signatures, and there it was. Clear as day. My property line hadn't moved. Not 6 feet, not 6 inches. The survey they were using? It didn't override the original plat. It was, let's just say, convenient. By noon, I had copies of everything. By 2:30, I was back in my truck, parked across from that same stone entrance. And by 3:00, I filed a formal notice revoking permission for any structures on my land. No drama, no speeches, just paperwork. That night, I slept better than I expected. Not because the problem was solved, but because I knew exactly what was going to happen next. And I knew they didn't. The next morning, just after sunrise, I heard engines before I even got out of bed. Low, heavy, mechanical, the kind of sound that doesn't ask for attention, it takes it. I stepped out onto my porch with a cup of coffee and saw them. 2 trucks, a small excavator, and a crew already unloading equipment right at the entrance to Briar Hollow. For a second, just a second, I wondered if I'd gone too far. Then I remembered that plastic sign zip-tied to my fence. Property line adjusted. Yeah, this felt about right. One of the workers noticed me watching, gave a quick nod, then went back to his job. No hesitation, no confusion, because as far as they were concerned, this was legitimate work on private property, which it was. They started with the sign. Big stone slab, probably weighed a few thousand pounds, carved lettering polished to shine. It took them a while to rig it up, chains clanking, machinery humming, and then slowly, almost gracefully, it lifted off the ground. That's when the first car pulled up. A woman in a white SUV rolled down her window, staring at the scene like she'd just driven into the wrong movie. "What's going on?" she asked one of the crew. He just shrugged. "Property owner's orders." She looked past him, and her eyes landed on me. And I could see the question forming before she even asked it. She didn't even finish the question, just looked from me to the sign hanging in the air, chains tight, dust falling off the stone as it lifted, and you could see it hit her in real time that something bigger was happening, something none of them had been told about. I didn't say anything, just took a sip of my coffee and watched, because at that point there wasn't really anything left to explain. Not yet. Within 10 minutes, more cars started pulling up, people slowing down, stopping, rolling their windows halfway like that would somehow give them a better angle on what was going on. A couple of them stepped out, hands on hips, confused, irritated, already looking for someone to blame. And then, right on cue, I saw a black sedan swing into the entrance a little too fast, tires crunching hard against the gravel. Mark Calloway stepped out before the car had even fully stopped. He didn't walk over. He stormed straight toward the crew first, waving his arms like he could physically stop what was already in motion. Hey, what do you think you're doing?" he snapped, voice sharp, controlled, but just barely. One of the workers pointed over at me without even turning his head. "You'll want to talk to him." Mark followed the gesture, and the second our eyes met, I saw it. That shift. That moment where confidence cracks just enough to let reality in. He walked toward me slower this time, trying to piece things together before he spoke. "You need to stop this. Right now." His voice was lower now, but tighter. "That structure belongs to the community." I set my coffee down on the porch railing and stepped off, closing the distance between us at my own pace. "No, it doesn't." He shook his head immediately, like rejecting the idea would make it untrue. "We have documentation." "I do too." I cut in, reaching into the folder I'd brought out with me, pulling out the copies from the county office. I handed them to him, not aggressively, just matter of fact. Original plat. Boundary line. No easement. No agreement. That entrance is sitting on my land. He flipped through the pages faster than he could actually read them, eyes darting, jaw tightening with every second. Behind him, the excavator shifted, hydraulics hissing as the stone sign was carefully lowered onto a flatbed trailer. You can't just remove it, he said finally, but there was less certainty in it now. This is a shared access point. No, I said, calm as I'd ever been. It's a structure on private property that I allowed to be there, until you decided my property line was flexible. That one landed. You could see it in the way his shoulders dropped just slightly, the way his grip on the papers loosened like they suddenly weighed more than before. Around us, more residents had gathered, voices starting to rise in that messy, overlapping way crowds do when no one has the full story, but everyone has an opinion. What's happening? Why are they tearing it down? Is this even legal? Mark glanced back at them, then leaned in closer to me, lowering his voice. We can resolve this without all of this, he said, gesturing toward the machinery, the workers now moving on to the stone wall that framed the entrance. If there's been a misunderstanding. 6 feet isn't a misunderstanding, I said quietly. It's a decision. For a second, neither of us said anything. Just the sound of engines, metal against stone, pieces of their entrance being dismantled one section at a time. The waterfall shut off at some point, the steady trickle replaced by silence that somehow made everything feel louder. By noon it was gone. Not damaged. Not partially removed. Gone. All that was left was a wide, open stretch of road leading straight into Briar Hollow. No sign, no walls, no carefully framed entrance to separate it from everything else. Just pavement and space, and that was enough. Because by that afternoon, the consequences started rolling in. At first it was just a couple of delivery trucks cutting through, drivers following GPS routes that suddenly saw an open path where there hadn't been one before. Then it was commuters, people from the next county over realizing they could shave a few minutes off their drive. Teenagers showed up by evening, treating it like a shortcut, music loud, tires spinning just enough to leave a mark. And the residents, they noticed. Security, which had always been more of a suggestion than a system, suddenly became a real concern. People started posting in their neighborhood group, calling meetings, demanding answers. Property values came up more than once, not quietly either. I didn't have to go over there to hear about it. It came to me. Mark showed up at my place 2 days later, this time without the smile, without the practiced calm. He looked tired, like he hadn't slept much, like the weight of a few hundred unhappy homeowners had settled squarely on his shoulders. We need to fix this, he said, standing at the edge of my yard, not quite stepping fully onto it like he suddenly respected the line a little more than before. I leaned against the porch post, arms crossed. You already had a chance to do that. He exhaled slowly, nodding once. We'll move your fence back. Exactly where it was. At our cost. I shook my head. Not enough. He expected that. I could tell. We'll compensate you for the land usage. Retroactively. Still not enough. There was a flicker of frustration then. Quick, but sharp. Then what do you want? And there it was. Not a demand, not a threat, just a question he didn't want to ask, but didn't have a choice anymore. I let the silence sit for a second, not to drag it out, just to make sure he understood this wasn't reaction anymore. This was intention. I want it in writing, I said. Permanent easement. Defined boundary, exactly as recorded. Monthly compensation for the portion you're using. And acknowledgement that the original line was never yours to move. He looked at me like he was doing the math in real time, cost, backlash, time. All of it stacking up against one simple truth. They needed that entrance more than I needed to give it back. That's a lot, he said finally. So is losing control of your neighborhood access point, I replied. Another pause, longer this time. Then he nodded. Okay. And just like that, everything shifted again. It took about a week to finalize. Lawyers got involved. Paperwork went back and forth. Signatures lined up exactly where they were supposed to. My fence went back to where it had always belonged. Rebuilt with better materials than before. Not that it mattered, because this time it wasn't about the wood or the nails. It was about the line. They rebuilt their entrance too, smaller, simpler, pulled back just enough to sit where it legally could. No overreach, no assumptions, just structure on borrowed ground. Every month, a check shows up, not life-changing money, but steady, consistent, a reminder more than anything else. And every time someone drives through that entrance, past the sign that doesn't quite look as impressive as it used to, they're doing it because I allow it. Not because someone assumed I wouldn't mind. And that 6 feet? Yeah, it's mine again. Now here's the thing. I didn't do this because I hate HOAs, or because I wanted to start a war with a neighborhood that just moved in next door. Truth is, most of those people had no idea what was happening until it blew up in front of them. But lines matter, not just on paper, but in how people treat each other. Because the second someone decides your boundary is flexible, they're really saying you are too. So I'm curious, if you were in my place, would you have handled it the same way? Or would you have taken it to court and kept it clean? And if you were one of those homeowners, waking up to your entire entrance gone overnight, who would you blame? Let me know in the comments. Because honestly, this one still splits people right down the middle.